Killiansburg Cave Nightmare. June 1992. 10 Boy Scouts headed into Killiansburg Cave, a modest limestone system tucked into the hills of West Virginia near the Potomac River. It wasn't famous, it wasn't deep, and it wasn't supposed to be dangerous, just a maze of narrow, winding passages that felt adventurous enough for a summer trip. One of the scouts was 13-year-old Brian Quinn, small-framed, curious, and the type who noticed side details instead of the obvious path. While most of the group stayed in the main chambers, Brian's attention drifted to a side opening barely wider than a backpack, tight, low, and easy to ignore. To Brian, it looked like a secret. Without telling anyone, he dropped to the ground and slid inside. The tunnel closed in immediately. Cold, wet rock pressed against his chest and arms as he crawled forward. A few feet in, the passage bent sharply into an L. To get through, Brian had to twist his body into an awkward position, forcing his legs at an angle that felt wrong but workable. He squeezed past the bend. On the other side, the space opened just a little, still cramped, but manageable. For a brief moment, he felt proud. Then he tried to go back. Nothing moved. The turn he had just conquered now worked against him. His legs were locked at a bad angle, his hips wedged. He pushed, pulled, shifted, no progress. The realization hit fast. He was stuck. Alone. In a tunnel no one else even knew existed. Back in the main chamber, the group started counting heads. There were only 9. They called Brian's name and searched the obvious areas, unaware he had slipped into something smaller. Deep inside the rock, Brian could hear them. Talking hurt. Breathing was shallow, but he forced his voice out anyway. Eventually, someone heard him. They followed the sound and found Brian's legs sticking out of the narrow passage. A few scouts tried pulling gently. Others shouted advice. Nothing changed. He was wedged solid. Inside the tunnel, Brian's chest was compressed, his legs painfully overstretched. Every movement sent a surge of panic through him. Help finally reached the scout leader, who was also Brian's mother. She rushed in and crawled through the passage until she could reach him. She called to him. He answered, frightened, crying, but still conscious. She understood the problem immediately. The only way out was to undo the same painful movement he'd used to get in. Brian didn't want to try. It hurt too much, but she stayed calm, talked him through it, and slowly guided his legs back inch by inch. He screamed as his knees scraped rock and his body twisted free. Outside the tunnel, the other scouts stood silent, listening. At last, his upper body slipped out. One final pull, and Brian was free. He collapsed in the wider passage, shaking and sobbing. The cave suddenly felt smaller than ever. With his mother's help, he rushed back the way they came. When they finally reached daylight, Brian dropped onto the grass, gulping air, streaked with tears and dust. He healed physically within days, but that narrow tunnel and how close it came to ending very differently never really left him. Bronson Cave Incident. Early morning, July 1st, 1985. To friends 25-year-old Michael Hall and 24-year-old Roman Lazowski stood at the entrance of Bronson Cave in Spring Hill Park, near Bloomington, Indiana. It had rained all night. The ground was soaked, the air heavy, and the cave was breathing out cold dampness. None of that stopped them. The plan sounded simple enough. Follow the underground stream from Bronson Cave and come out at Donaldson Cave. Lazowski had done parts of the route before. What could go wrong? They wore shorts, tennis shoes, and optimism. Each had a flashlight, and that was basically it. The moment they stepped inside, reality showed up. The stream they expected had turned into a raging underground river. Water surged up to their waists, fast and aggressive. At first, it felt exciting. They laughed, leaned into it, treated it like a rough water ride. That mood didn't last. The current grew stronger with every step. When they tried to turn back, they realized the cave had already decided for them. Fighting the water was impossible. The only option left was forward. Then everything unraveled. Lazowski slipped. The current yanked him off his feet and slammed him into the rock walls. Somehow, he caught a narrow ledge and held on. He yelled a warning to Hall. Hall tried to move toward him and immediately lost control. For a brief second, Hall's flashlight floated on the surface. Then it disappeared. Luck, pure and accidental, saved him. The water carried Hall toward the Donaldson Cave exit. He grabbed a railing, hauled himself out, and stumbled into daylight battered and shaking. Serta? His friend was gone. He ran for help. Inside the cave, Roman Lazowski was still alive. Soaked, freezing, and alone. He spotted a tiny crevice just above the rushing water, a ledge barely 6 inches wide. Just enough to wedge himself into. A former Marine with survival training, he knew panic would kill him faster than the cold. The cave sat at 54 degrees. His clothes were drenched. The chill never stopped working on him. Sleeping wasn't an option. One wrong shift and he'd be swept away. Time stretched into something unrecognizable. He talked to himself, pretended someone else was there, argued imaginary NBA draft picks just to keep his brain awake. Every so often, he shouted for help, knowing the rock swallowed his voice whole. Outside, rescue teams gathered. Hall's story gave them a rough idea of where Lazowski was, but the flooding made entry nearly impossible. One team turned back after 600 feet. Another tried from Donaldson Cave and hit a submerged ceiling. With no safe path in, rescuers started drilling from above. By Wednesday morning, nearly 55 hours later, divers in wetsuits pushed through Donaldson Cave to a low-ceiling section. A beam of light caught a human face. They found him. Using a bullhorn, they told Lazowski to stay calm. At 5 p.m., rescuer Steve Collins reached his ledge and tossed a rope across the torrent. Lazowski secured it. Then the anchor failed. Both men were ripped into the current. Downstream, another rescue team was ready. They caught them! Lazowski was fitted with a helmet and the top of a wetsuit, clipped into a rope system suspended above the water, and slowly guided out. At 8 p.m., he emerged from the cave shivering, exhausted, barely standing, but alive. Doctors treated him for hypothermia, dehydration, and extreme fatigue. After 55 hours alone in freezing darkness, Roman Lazowski walked out of the cave alive. Weatherly Well Cave, February 11th, 1998. A cold Tennessee morning. 4 seasoned Caverjanes, Lewis, Alan England, Darl Moore, and Jerry Olson stood in the woods staring at a hole in the ground that didn't he look like it wanted visitors. Jerry had spotted it while ridge walking and figured it deserved a closer look. Locals called it Weatherly Well. No map, no history, just a crack in the earth and a bad feeling. The entrance wasted no time being hostile. A vertical slit, barely 9 inches wide, dropped straight down, opening into a 7-foot fall. Then another 10-foot drop after that. One person at a time. No comfort, no forgiveness. Cold, wet rock pressed in from every side like the cave was already reconsidering this whole idea. Past the opening, the passage twisted into darkness tight, awkward, and claustrophobic enough to mess with your head. Alan England volunteered to go first. He was 63, the oldest of the group, but also the smallest and most flexible. Decades of calving behind him. Experience, overconfidence. With a rope fixed as a handline, Alan eased himself into the slot. He flattened his chest, rotated his shoulders, and slid downward, inch by inch. The stone scraped at him, soaked his clothes, stole his breath. When he finally slipped through, he dropped into a slightly wider space below, paused, and swept his headlamp around. What he saw didn't help. Another 10-foot vertical drop disappeared into deeper black. The cave curled away without offering any clue where it led. Tempting but not smart. Alone. No second rope. No one below to help. Alan made the call to turn back. Getting up the lower drop wasn't the problem. Muscle memory took over. The real fight started when he reached the narrow slot he'd come through earlier. Gravity had been generous on the way down. On the way up, it turned cruel. Alan reached, pulled and stopped. His shoulders jammed. There was no space to adjust, no leverage to work with. His wet shirt clung to his body, turning friction into an enemy. He tried twisting, pushing, forcing his way through. Each attempt only locked him tighter. Above him, Lewis and Moore knew something was wrong. They tugged on the rope, but the opening was too tight for real help. Alan wasn't moving. He was stuck. Minutes dragged on. The cave grew colder. Water seeped into his clothes, draining what warmth he had left. The stone pressed against his chest, making every breath shallow and earned. Shaking, struggling to breathe fully, Alan felt his strength slipping away. His team lowered extra clothing and a thermos of hot liquid, trying to keep hypothermia at bay. It wasn't enough. Eventually, Alan said the words no caver ever wants to say. He was done. They needed help. Lewis and Olson got out fast and contacted the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team. Within 2 hours, specialists arrived, with gear meant for problems exactly like this. By the time they reached Alan, he had been trapped nearly 5 hours, pale, trembling, exhausted. The rescue setup was delicate. A pulley system. No room for mistakes. Slowly, painfully, they worked him upward, inch by inch, past stone that scraped ribs and shoulders with zero sympathy. Alan clenched his teeth and held on. After an hour of careful effort, he cleared the slot. Soaked, shaking, alive. He walked out under his own power, stubborn as ever, even though his legs barely agreed. Later, he admitted what the cave had already proven. He'd underestimated it. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more stories like this, and drop your suggestions for the next one in the comments.